Welcome to the city staff transportation. Oh, nope. We're good?
You're good, sorry. Yep.
Okay. We'll start over. So good evening. This is Chair Miller, and I would like to formally call the meeting to order. Welcome to city staff, transportation commissioners, and the public to the February 20th Transportation Commission meeting. Meetings are being held in person, televised on Cox Cable Channel 11, and streamed online at scottsdaleaz.gov for the public to listen and view the meeting in progress. I'd like to ask for a roll call to begin this evening's meeting.
Chair Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Marmon.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Koftile.
Here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Thank you. All present.
Spoken comment is being accepted for agendized and non-agendized items. The request to speak forms must be submitted no later than 90 minutes before the start of this meeting. Do we have any requests to speak?
Chair Miller, members of the commission, we have no written comments this evening, but we do have one request to speak form for agenda item number 3.
And Kyle, will we take that when we get to the agenda item, correct?
Correct, yes. We'll have the presentation, and then at the end of that, we'll have an opportunity for the citizen to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. So written comments are being accepted for agendized and non-agendized items and should be submitted electronically at least 90 minutes before the start of this meeting. These comments are also emailed to the Transportation Commission and posted online. Kyle, other than the comment that you mentioned, do we have any comments, written comments?
We do not. Thank you.
Great, and so with that, we will take up the approval of the meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments on the meeting minutes? No? Now, I did notice that there was one tiny typo. It is on page 4, under number 5, where the motion is in the very second line. It says strategic transportation. So if you can make that.
We can make that change, absolutely.
I thought that's what we voted for.
Transportation. Okay. With that, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes with that change.
I move that we approve the minutes with that change.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Kyle, will you take the roll?
Yes, we'll do a roll call here. Chair Miller.
Approved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Merman.
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Koftile.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis.
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes are approved as amended.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the Annual Transportation Commission report. We had tabled that from last month and had it corrected and updated. Any comments on the report? No. With that, do we have a motion to approve?
Chair Miller, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
And a second. Kyle, take the vote.
Yes, perfect. And Chair Miller.
Approved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Merman.
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Koftile.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Yes.
And Commissioner Davis.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Next up is the Clarendon Avenue variance request.
Chair and members of the Transportation Commission, my name is Helene Dominguez, Senior Traffic Engineer, and the item I would like to discuss today is a variance request to the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program warranting criteria for Clarendon Avenue from 82nd Street to Granite Reef Road. Going over a summary of the agenda, we'll first discuss the Commission's role and what we are seeking today. We'll go over the warranting criteria to the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. We'll be providing an overview of the site location and describing physical characteristics of the study segment. We'll be providing the results of the speed and volume data that was collected as part of this request. We'll be providing a staff recommendation and then finally a recommended action for the Commission today. So starting with the Commission's role, the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program is the mechanism that we use to evaluate requests for traffic calming devices such as speed cushions. The steps to the NTMP are shown on the slide. So we received a request from a resident who lives on Clarendon Avenue. They contacted the city and discussed their concerns. They submitted a letter of interest form, and we collected the traffic data to determine if the traffic calming device was warranted. And that's where we are today. The results of the data show that the street is close to, but does not quite meet the minimum criteria in the NTMP. So what we are requesting is a variance to the warranting criteria so that we can move forward with the next step in the process, which is the neighborhood petition. And then finally, the last step would be to obtain Commission approval for construction. So I want to highlight that the purpose of today's item is not to approve the construction of a traffic calming device. It's to approve a request for a variance to the criteria in the NTMP. Here's a summary of the warranting criteria for traffic calming devices. The first is that the street must be between 660 feet and a mile long in length. The street must be paved and planned for only one through lane in each direction. The volume criterion is that the street must have between 500 and 3,000 vehicles per day. The speed criterion is made up of two components. The first is that at least 40% of traffic is traveling 5 miles per hour or more above the speed limit. The second component is that at least 20% of traffic is traveling 10 miles per hour or more above the speed limit. The last criteria is that the street must have at least 50% direct residential frontage, with exceptions made to streets adjacent to schools or designated as bike or ped routes. Here's an overview of the study segment. So Clarendon Avenue is located halfway between Osborne Road and Indian School Road. The segment between 82nd Street and Granite Reef Road is a 1/4 mile in length. It's classified as a local residential roadway that is paved and has one lane in each direction. And the study street segment has direct residential frontage on 100% of its length. So the subject street does meet all of the physical criteria described in the NTMP. Some other features to note is that the street is significantly wider than both adjacent parallel local residential streets, as well as wider than what's required by the DSPM for this classification. The speed is posted at 25 miles per hour, and the street does not have any pavement markings. So going over the results of the data, after we received the letter of interest form, we collected data this middle of January of this year at a location approximately halfway between the study limits. And the results of the data show that the street segment has approximately 458 vehicles per day, 43% of cars are traveling 30 miles per hour or over, and 20% of cars are traveling 35 miles per hour or over. So based off of the results, the volume criterion is not met. It's short by 42 cars. The speed criteria are met, both components. We also reviewed crash history from the most recent 5 years to find segment-related crashes along the street segment, and this excludes intersection-related crashes on either end of the street segment, but there was 2 crashes that occurred within the past 5 years. The first in July of 2020, it was coded as a rear-end crash, resulting in no injury. The second crash happened in January 2023. This situation was a vehicle who was speeding and ran off the road, struck a fence on a residential property, and then ultimately crashed head-on with a parked car. And as I noted, speed was noted as a factor in the crash report for this crash. So based off of the data that we collected for this study segment, traffic engineering staff does recommend that the variance to the NTMP warranting criteria be approved for the following reasons. The main one being that the majority of the warranting criteria is met, with the sole exception of the volume criterion. However, the measured volumes are within 10% of the minimum threshold, and so we feel that a traffic calming device would still be appropriate on this street segment. Related to that, the measured speeds show a notable speeding trend on this street segment. Typical NTMP requests that we receive, street segments meet the volume criterion, but typically do not meet the speed criterion. So it is notable that this street has such high speeds. There is a history of segment-related crashes, with at least one being related to speeding. And then the last thing is that this segment of Clarendon Avenue is near Pima Elementary School, so drop-off and pickup activities from the school may be affecting traffic patterns along this segment of Clarendon Avenue. So the last thing is the recommended action for the commission. So we recommend that the Transportation Commission move to approve the variance to the NTMP warranting criteria for Clarendon Avenue from 82nd Street to Granite Reef Road in order to proceed with the initiation of the neighborhood petition.
Thank you.
And that's it.
Are there any questions?
Questions, but do we hear a citizen first?
Oh, do we? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
Chair Miller, members of the commission, I will call up Troyce Hundell to the podium, and you will have 3 minutes if you wouldn't mind stating your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Is it ready to go? Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Troyce Hundell. I live at 8326 East Clarendon Avenue. I have been a resident of Scottsdale since 1978. I've lived in the same house for the last 38 years with my wife and my 3 children, who have now left me, thank God. I'm here to represent the citizens that live on this particular segment of Clarendon. When I bought this house back in 1978, it was a nice, quiet neighborhood. We loved the home. And just in the last 7 to 10 years, I've watched Scottsdale explode with population and growth from autos and businesses and what have you. And now Clarendon has turned into a mini 101, as I call it, refer to it. I have been calling the police department and reporting speeding on a daily basis, which I have since ceased to do because Sergeant Anderson of the Scottsdale Police Department told me that there are only 6 motorcycle officers. The officer that did do an hour and a half on our street cited two cars for speeding over 40 miles an hour. He said the average speed was between 27 and 37 miles an hour. And I didn't want to ruffle his feathers or stir the pot, but I thought, well, the speed limit's 25, and you think that that's acceptable. Well, it's not acceptable to the residents that live on that block, and it certainly isn't acceptable to me. The street is 37 feet wide, and it's 10 feet wider than all streets in either direction in the Hallcraft development. We have no cars, usually, as a rule, parked on any side of our street. So it's like a free-for-all. When you come, the traffic comes off of the 101. Usually the westbound traffic, if you look at the numbers and that was compiled, the data, it shows westbound is worse than eastbound. Well, the westbound comes off the interstate 101, and instead of going from Pima to Hayden, they cut through my neighborhood. They cut down Granite Reef, and I walk my dog every day. I watch this happen all day long, and they make the turn, and it's just a beeline free-for-all to the next stop sign. And this has been ongoing for years, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. We have many, many children that live on the street, and in one day, something else is going to happen. I was amazed to see that you got an opportunity to see that there was a fence of a neighbor taken out. That fence was a 8-year-old daughter's or 8-year-old girl's fence where she was playing in that confined area. And the people that own the house are the Messenger family of Scottsdale. The Messenger right over here on Indian School in Miller. That's the woman that owns Messenger. It's her house. So, I mean, these people that come, these are neighbors. These aren't just people that are coming off the freeway. These are residents. These are VRBOs. These are the Airbnb people. They're people that just don't care. They're residents that live in the community. It's a feeder street back in my community, and it's got to stop. I almost got broadsided the other day turning into my driveway, for God's sake, because I didn't turn my turn signal on to let them know I was going to turn left into my driveway, and they started to pass me on the left. And I just happened to look in my rearview mirror, or my side mirror, and I saw them, and I hit my brakes, and they just went flying past me.
Mr. Hudnell, we are at 3 minutes.
So,
Thank you.
anyway, I mean, I thank you for my time here tonight, and I hope that you will approve this petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hudnall. Now, Vice Chair Wilcoxon?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller, and thank you for the presentation. Just had a couple of questions. If approved, and I know we're just here to talk about granting the variance, but if we approve it and it goes to the petition and gets approved, what are we talking about as far as traffic calming? Is it just speed humps, or what is it? What are we looking at?
Well, we would still need to do a formal evaluation, but just as a preliminary design, we would go with speed cushions, just based off of the geometrics of the roadway would be the best solution there.
Okay, and then the only other question is, you said it was near Pima Elementary. Is Pima does it have a lot of kids from the neighborhood walking to Pima, do we know?
Oh, I'm not sure. I could look into, let me see if I can go back to the map. So it is a very residential neighborhood, and just based off the location of Pima, I would assume kids come from all around the school. So I think it would make sense that students are using Clarendon, especially since it's more of a major thoroughfare than some of the other local residential roadways.
Okay.
In this neighborhood.
All right, and then I'm assuming, I think I know the answer, but I'm assuming we don't know, there's been no license plate study, so we don't know where the traffic is coming from, if it's local or if it is cut through primarily, things like that.
Yeah, we don't know exactly where the traffic is coming from. The volume that we take and the criteria that we consider captures this issue of cut-through traffic. So if there is a large amount of cut-through traffic, it would be represented in the data. And like you said, we don't know traffic patterns, but just based off of the layout of Clarendon Avenue, it is a quarter-mile street, as well as Granite Reef, so it would potentially lead to cut-through traffic going through Clarendon Avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Marmon.
Thank you. Good presentation. I see that in the NTMP regulations, I see the word exemption, but I don't see variance. Is there a difference between exemption and the variance?
Oh, no, there's no difference. This is just a request to approve a certain case that just does not meet the minimum criteria. Yeah, that's what variance is supposed to mean.
Would you go over again why you think we should do it based on the low traffic count?
Yes, so this section of Clarendon Avenue measured speeds that were very high based off of the requests that we've received, at least recently. The speed criterion is very rarely met. So just based off of the speed, the speed cushion would still be appropriate. The volume is only marginally lower than the minimum threshold, and we feel that this is acceptable, just based off of the other characteristics of the roadway as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Koftal. Yep. Commissioner Pankowitz.
So a question for staff. It looks like this is the half-mile road, and I heard a couple of things. I heard no pavement markings, wider than usual, and head-on crash. I'm wondering if staff is looking at these types of roads for bigger traffic calming projects. Commissioner Wilcoxon brought up the point of maybe kids walking to school, but who would want to walk to school with traffic zooming by? I wouldn't send my kids walking in those conditions. And we know that the design of the road or lack thereof has a lot to do with that. I don't have a problem with cushions, but it seems that in such a long stretch of road, even the whole length of Clarendon, there is a lot of opportunity for traffic calming. I live in South Scottsdale, and Roosevelt from Scottsdale Road to Hayden Road is sort of a cut through also. It's like the halfway point, and there are a lot of traffic calming features there. So I'm wondering what are the bigger projects for the street besides speed cushions, that if a person that quite honestly at a 25-mile-per-hour road can hit a fence or have a head-on crash, could probably go over these and fly somewhere else.
Yes, so I'm not fully well-versed in what a community-wide traffic calming study would entail, but we could consider just the other, I'll call them major residential streets through this neighborhood to try and evaluate more of a comprehensive plan that incorporates maybe the entire length of Clarendon, not just this quarter-mile segment, maybe at 82nd Street and Granite Reef Road. But for now, that is not the plan that we have in place. The petition was just for speed cushions on this specific segment. But as I said, we will consider that and look into that.
Chair Miller and Commissioner Pinkowicz, I just wanted to add, if the speed cushions are spaced effectively, it will have the same effect of pretty much any other traffic calming device, maybe better. So that's kind of the key thing that we look at when we're doing these projects, is making sure that they're spaced at appropriate intervals, because then you can control the rate at which people will speed up in between the traffic calming devices, and that's what we're looking at. And we don't really do traffic calming outside of this program. Most of the streets, it's actually really rare to have 2 crashes in a 5-year period on a street like this. So we don't have a whole lot of local streets like that in the city. So yeah, and then the other part about traffic calming is it can be controversial. Sometimes residents, for as many people who want it, sometimes there's that many people who don't want traffic calming on their street. And so that's why we have this citizen-led process that includes a petition and the interest form to make sure that the whole neighborhood is on the same page.
Thank you. My other question is, we're asking for a variance, and I see how we almost meet that threshold. Are there any guidelines for criteria that you can have for these variances? So maybe if you check 2 out of 3, like you kind of mentioned on the one slide that talks about near school or, unusual crashes and things like that, so that these things maybe don't have to come to the commission every time. And if a particular street meets, I don't know, 2 other criteria, that a resident doesn't have to be waiting for this whole process.
Thank you. Yes, I see your point. The policy is written in such a way to where the criteria must be met. There's not too much wiggle room allotted to, say, engineering judgment, which is why we're here today to request that exemption. But as you mentioned, that takes time. So that is also something we'll take into consideration in the development of the policy.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes. Commissioner Davis.
How did we determine the vehicle trips per day threshold of 500 as the cutoff before we would consider implementation?
I don't have the history specifically of how that threshold was chosen. I will say that 500 vehicles per day is generally typical for municipalities as a threshold for traffic calming devices. I'm not sure, Sam, if you have more background.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Yeah, so we've had that volume threshold since the early 2000s, I believe. And at the time, we would have, I don't know exactly, but I imagine we would have done a peer review of other cities and other agencies that have traffic calming programs, and that's where we would have gotten that number from.
Thank you. Yeah, I just didn't know if this was a point where we would consider, potentially amending that for the future. But are you aware of any other situations where we've granted variances for this program?
Yes, there was a variance requested back in 2023. It was Oak from 72nd to Hayden. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was about a little over a year ago that it was requested. It was similar presentation. However, the request staff recommendation was to not approve the variance in that situation. That variance request had come up as a resident petition, whereas in the situation, the case was close enough to the warranting criteria that we came to the commission to recommend approval for the variance.
Do you know which criteria the variance was requesting? To which of the 3? If it was trips per day or the 2 speed thresholds?
For the previous case, I believe it did not meet the speed or volume threshold.
Okay, thank you. And then final question. I understand that this is not a vote to move forward with construction. It goes to the citizen, to the petition process. Could you maybe explain what that final step is? before it comes back one more time?
Yeah, sure. It's not the final step, but the second to last step. The neighborhood petition involves creating a notification area and an affected area. So the department evaluates the neighborhood to determine which residences will be affected by the installation of the traffic calming device. After we identify that area, we create a petition where we collect signatures from property owners. The petition requires that 70% of property owners approve of the traffic calming device plan. And after the 70% approval is obtained, that's when we come back to Transportation Commission to request the final approval for construction.
Okay, so this is a, kind of, at that point, it's more of a, it's a city-led process of talking to the residents?
It is a resident-led process to collect the signatures.
Okay, understood. Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kafta.
Hi. I had a couple of thoughts that were triggered by Commissioner Pankowitz's questions, just mostly relating to that second, the part we're not talking about here from 82nd to Hayden. During that citizen petition, I mean, all right, let me word myself, sorry. Does it continue to be 36 feet wide over 82nd Street?
I believe it does, yes. The width is constant from Hayden all the way to Granite Reef, and I believe it might narrow east of Granite Reef, but the segment you're describing, yeah, it's the same width.
And does, is there any reason to believe that the traffic speeding, the speeding would be less on that part there, on that second part?
I believe that there may be reason to believe that people are going slower just based off of the fact that it's closer to Hayden Road and people are turning off of it. We can't say for sure. We would need to collect the traffic data, and the data collection is sort of governed by these requests and the letter of interest forms that are submitted. That's how we determine where to collect the data, but without having the data in front of me, I couldn't say whether necessarily we could expect more speeding on that street or not.
So I guess the only real comment I would make then would be I would be interested in seeing if there was something the city could do to have this project be the full half mile, or especially if we're going to be working in that area anyway, that would be something I would want the city to consider, maybe expanding that, especially if we're going to have the citizen-led petition. It's just, you know, it's just the extra quarter mile there to get the petitions and to contact the residents, because it would seem like they would be experiencing the same issues even if they haven't spoken up. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I will just comment that I live south of there. Honestly, I have used that street as cut through, come down Granite Reef, but I go down 82nd Street to cut back to Osborne to Granite Reef to come south of Thomas. Don't speed that much, but I cannot imagine sitting in my house and just seeing 20 cars speeding by in a day. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. And with that, we've got a recommendation from city staff. I'll take a motion to accept that recommendation, change the recommendation.
Yeah. I move to approve the variance to the NTMP warranting criteria to proceed with the initiation of the neighborhood petition for Clarendon Avenue between 82nd Street and Granite Reef.
Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Kyle, will you take the roll?
Yes. Chair Miller.
Approved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Marmon.
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Crofttile.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis.
Yes.
Thank you. Approved.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sir, thank you for coming and bringing this to our attention, and we'll see you again on the next step.
Thank you, Commission.
Next up, Strategic Transportation Safety Plan. It's like the first big presentation in a long process for the safety plan.
First of many to come, so we'll kick it off with a good conversation about where we've been and what we've seen from communities similar to ours and what they've done in their plans to address safety. So thank you, Commission. Thank you, Chair and Commission members. I'd like to start first by correcting something that I said last meeting. I said that we only had one intersection on MAG's top 100 dangerous intersections. We in fact have two, one at Camelback and Goldwater, and then Thomas and Hayden. So I needed to correct that before we started to say that there was two instead of one. So tonight's meeting, we're going to talk about the department's history safety in both our plans and our practices, and then I will turn it over to our consultant, T.Y. Lin, to talk about our common practices assessment and what we've seen from other communities and their safety plans. So both regionally as well as across the country. So starting with safety plan, we have over 20 years of dedicated safety planning history in this city. We have several plans that have expressed safety initiatives, safety goals in them, starting with the 2003 plan. And I'll go into more details, we'll go into the other slides, but dating back to 2003, we've written down goals and policies aligning with improving safety on our streets and in our transportation network. We have several common safety countermeasures that we've been employing into the city for the past 20 years. And then I'll show the crash trend data over those last 20 years and show that it has had some level of an impact moving us in the right direction. The key thing is over time, the common theme is to reduce injuries in our transportation network. That has started all the way back in the 2003 plan and has just been refined, modified, and improved on throughout each one of these additional plans. So starting with the 2003 master plan, it was the first plan that really established prioritizing safety as a goal in balance or alongside transportation system capacity. So the first time we really wrote that down into a plan and established that we wanted to start prioritizing safety in the projects that we did and in the ways that we looked and interpreted transportation in the city. One of another goals that was brought up in the 2003 plan was that the Transportation Commission as a body should look to prioritize projects from an emphasis of safety to reduce injuries as well as other factors. So we were definitely looking at that as a component in transportation before 2003. This is the first time we really wrote that down and made that an established goal and policy for the city. 2008, we really expanded on it by multiple pages in the 2008 plan. If anybody's seen the 2008 plan, it's a very, very big document. So we had 6 or 7 pages devoted just to safety. One of the overall goal for safety in the 2008 plan was the reduction of injuries and deaths in the transportation-related causes. So that was the overall goal. Then it went into several different sections and factors, including how could we improve on enforcement, public education, engineering, including ITS improvements and roundabouts, collision analysis, and safe routes to school. So emphasizing with engineering that these two improvements are key safety factors that can be used to reduce the serious injuries and deaths due to transportation-related causes. So really, this started the really strong foundation for what this future plan would be building off of this plan, highlighting and going into detail about the types of countermeasures and goals that would align with how to improve safety in transportation. 2016 expanded on the 2008 by greater importance of information based on data-driven solutions, so really focusing on how are we collecting the data related to safety as well as volumes, and how are we using that data. It established the roundabout's first policy, established a requirement or a goal to have a traffic volume and collision report prepared every 2 years, a vital report that we use on a daily basis. We were doing that long before this, but this just established that we needed to continue having that report every 2 years so we could keep that string of data going throughout the course of our time and have a good trend line showing where we're going and how our safety is performing through the years. And then comprehensive speed limit studies. So we wanted our traffic engineers to keep looking and reviewing what is the speed limits, are they effectively doing what we need them to do on our roads? So can we keep looking at those and keep improving on the speed limits? Then we went to the general plan and the 2022 action plan and the general plan for 2035 both came out around the same time, both emphasizing several of the same things. The biggest thing from the general plan was it recognized the primary role of the automobile, but also looked to fully integrate other modes. So how could we understand that we are a auto-dependent community, but looking to make sure that other modes safely and effectively can get to where they need to go. Transportation safety goals included in the general plan was to improve transportation corridors for safety and efficiency, that being that overall goal that the general plan had. And then more refined goals was a really strong emphasis on reducing conflict points between modes. So that would be between cars and cars, as well as cars and the other modes, active modes and transit. Just how can we reduce those conflict points that lead to an increase in crashes. Retrofitting aging infrastructure and streets, a strong emphasis was put on this in the Transportation Action Plan, also emphasized in the general plan that we wanted to look at our infrastructure. It was getting to a point where it's aging. How can we retrofit that and improve that condition? And then creating non-motorized connections, so establishing more connections for non-motorized activities. Along with the general plan and in compliance with the general plan was the 2022 Transportation Action Plan that looked for preservation and refinement of the existing transportation system, and then a stronger emphasis on additional bike and pedestrian safety facilities. So grade separated crossings was a big emphasis in here. So how can we address pedestrian bicycle movement while eliminating that conflict point with cars? So that was one of the key emphasis, as well as various other ones in there. Extending the network for bicycle and pedestrians, increase safety, and also looking for ways to improve on the standard common countermeasures related to bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Current safety measures installed in the city over the past 20 years, going through several of the different types of safety measures that can be employed, and these are the ones that we generally do currently and have done over the past 20 years. So we have our 5-year pavement plan, our pavement friction management. We have a good group, a concentrated group of staff that is looking just to improve the condition of our pavement. That's their sole goal, is going out there, repaving our roads to the appropriate measure, whether it's a extreme retrofit or one of those small slurry seals to just keep the condition improved. So their goal is to keep our pavement condition index as high as possible, which will improve safety. Road safety audits, our traffic engineering team does many road safety audits all the time. They get requests for that. They do it themselves to look at several corridors, look for improvements along those corridors that we can address through some kind of a CIP project or through any of our other accounts to add safety improvements along those ways. Road safety plans, as I expressed just now, we have addressed several components of a safety plan in several of our transportation plans. This would be our first concentrated safety plan. So we want to keep the effort of our safety planning moving forward by adding this sole safety plan to our repertoire of things that we look at and use. Neighborhood traffic management, you just saw as Helene presented on. We use our neighborhood traffic management program to look at those neighborhood roads as they are brought to us by the public, evaluate it and see if there's ways that we can improve the safety on those local roads that don't quite get the same emphasis that we would put on our collectors and arterials, but are shown as a concern to the residents that live along them. Intersections are obviously one of the major nodes of safety, where all the conflict points are, or most of the conflict points. So looking for ways to install safety countermeasures at intersections is one of the most important aspects of what we would do in safety planning or safety engineering. Lagging left turns has been an established practice in Scottsdale for a long time, longer than 2023. So one of the early efforts for us to provide safety at our intersections. Flashing yellow arrows is something that we're starting to incorporate into our city. We have several dedicated funding sources towards adding those flashing yellow arrows, allowing for less confusion when it comes to turning left while there's a green light. So we see that as a necessary safety improvement and are looking to implement and expand that throughout the city. Roundabouts, we have 26 roundabouts at this point. We have found them as a successful practice for improving safety at intersections. They are known to reduce serious and fatal injuries at those intersections. And so we have seen success at our roundabouts at preventing serious injuries and fatalities. Corridor access management, one of the key parts when we're doing development assessments is making sure that we are managing how much access is at our collectors and arterials. Yellow change intervals, a key thing is monitoring how our ITS and our TMC is reviewing how our signals are working and seeing how much of a yellow change is needed in order to prevent those red light speeding and see how that works. Backlight retrofit borders, we've used this mostly at the Hawks, but are definitely open to using this at the signals as well to make it easier for people to see the lights. The LELOs, we just gave a presentation on that, but the left in, left outs at non-signalized intersections have become a key feature for us, making safety improvements at those non-signalized areas to reduce conflict points and make sure that people are abiding by how they should be performing at that place. And then dedicated left and right turn lanes is a maybe somewhat obvious but definitely key thing to make sure that there's reduced conflict points throughout the intersections. Speed management, another key part. We have various levels of speeding throughout the city. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate speed limits for all users. Variable speed limits have been introduced into the city on Camelback specifically, as you can see in the picture, to address possible needs for adjusting and changing the speed limit through that corridor. And then speed safety cameras, we have several speed safety cameras and a whole speed safety camera program for the city, both permanent speed cameras as well as the mobile and portable towers that will go out in various locations. We partner with PD a lot on where those are located, and they give us the data coming back from those on a regular basis so we can interpret how those are working and what's happening at those locations. Bicycle and pedestrian safety countermeasures, we do leading pedestrian intervals. We do grade separated crossings, as I presented, I think, sorry, that was at Paths and Trails Subcommittee, but I'll say it here. We have well over 100 grade separated crossings throughout the city, mostly along our multi-use paths. We find this a vital resource to prevent those conflict points between bikes and pedestrians, the vulnerable users that if they get hit by a car is definitely more concerning than if a car hits another car. I'm not saying that that's not concerning, just the vulnerability of a pedestrian and bicyclist is something to be noted and something to be definitely highlighted and needing extra emphasis on. Hawks and RFBs are key throughout the city. You can see the one on Scottsdale Road between the two malls right there. One of the most heavily used Hawks. Definitely increases people's ability to cross mid-block. Crosswalk visibility enhancements, we use this mostly on crosswalks that are attached to one of the multi-use paths, but we definitely want to use heightened paint, heightened lighting, heightened things that will allow cars to recognize that there is a pedestrian or bicyclist in the crosswalk and prevent that collision from occurring. Pedestrian refuge islands, a key part where if we cannot, or it's not warranted to put a hawk or an RFB, we'll put a pedestrian refuge so people can take a break mid-block, mid-crossing in the median, and make their way safely. Walkways, we want to make sure that there's as limited gaps in our sidewalk and multi-use path network as possible. Gaps lead to unconventional approaches to the network, and we would like to avoid people from making decisions that they wouldn't normally make if they had the connections they would. One of the keyest examples, and I know that our solution for this is a grade separated crossing, but we have a sidewalk gap or stop at Goldwater and Scottsdale, the northern part of Goldwater and Scottsdale, where the sidewalk just stops. We've seen and we've observed people walking along Goldwater through the terrain, the thick rocks, in order to continue their path. We know that if we prevent and eliminate as many gaps as possible, people won't make those tough decisions. They'll just continue along the pathway and stay safer. Bike lanes, including buffer bike lanes, is a very important way for us to reduce speeds along many roads, but also keep bicyclists safer. Buffer bike lanes show a heightened level of comfort and security for those bicyclists, as well as reducing speeds on heavily speeded roads. DMS standards, we have a very extensive book of our engineering standards that we want to apply. This is important for us to use on both our major roadway projects or just roadway projects in general, but also for developers. So when the Transportation Department requests additional features from a developer coming in, we want to add those safety countermeasures that we would like to see in the network. So we have a long list of safety improvements that are in the DSMPM that we would apply to new developments as well as ourselves when we do a roadway. Two of the examples that I have, one being preventing something from being in the network that we would find a safety hazard would be no boulders in medians or landscape buffers. This is obviously a very dense piece of material with cars moving. It's a safety hazard for us, and so we do have in our standards that we do not want boulders in the medians and landscape buffers. And then just a point of reference and something to follow and use as they are developing their plans, or we're developing our plans, is to avoid negative left turn offsets in the future. So keeping those sight lines available and making sure that people can see the cars coming when they make those left turn decisions. There's an extensive amount of lists of other things that we ask for in the DSMPM. These are just two examples that I had to show. DSMPM is a key feature that we use in order to improve safety throughout our network. So going to the results, over the past 20 years and even beyond, we have data going back, but I wanted to reference just the last couple decades that we've had a significant reduction in the serious injuries throughout the city. I don't think we can take full credit for that, right? There's been advancements in cars, car safety. There's been a level of behavior definitely takes an impact in it, but we have made infrastructure improvements throughout these 20 years, and we've seen a significant reduction in the injuries going from well in the 300s a year, so 300 serious injuries a year in the 90s to about 70 now in 2024. So that's trending in the right direction. We'd like to keep it trending in that direction. The fatalities have stayed very stable, bouncing between 7 to in the low teens every year. So that's just been a flat line. We'd like for that to go down, but we definitely see some encouragement by the trend of that serious fatality line. And so I'll talk very quickly about this, and then I'll pass it over to Ryan from TY Lynn to talk about the safety, the common practices that we saw from other communities. But so from a regional context and from a fatality rate per population, we still are in the scale of a high fatality rate to a high population. So in comparison to the rest of the region, we do have some work that can be done and improved on, so we can possibly change our color and move down to the low fatality rate, high population range that Gilbert and Chandler are in. So I'll pass over to you, and if you have any more expanded on this, otherwise you could just shift over and introduce you guys.
Ryan starts his presentation that we've implemented 2 safety features this past week. Just kind of wanted to bring because it corresponds with Nathan's presentation. One is on Thunderbird Road from Hayden Road over to Northside Park. There were, that roadway included bike lanes, but they were 17-foot wide lanes and a 15-foot wide lane. Our standard is 11. And so that corridor had a lot of input from the community regarding speed. And so we elected to try a paving solution first. So we added additional buffers for the bike lane, and with that we narrowed our lanes down to the 11 feet that is standard for our streets. So we're looking to see how that works. It should work well. It's done well in other corridors in the city. It also works to add buffering also for the pedestrians and those using trails in that corridor too. A second solution was a new speed feedback sign put on Chaparral Road between Hayden and Miller. So those two are citizen requests regarding safety, and just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thanks.
Good evening, Commissioners, Chair. My name is Ryan Wozniak. I am a senior transportation planner working for the TY Lynn. I'm joined by two talented colleagues, Chris Milner and Allison Sato. And so just wanted to introduce our team. We are a multidisciplinary team that doesn't sound all that shaking, but when you really dig down into it, I think that we provide a very interesting mix of consulting powerhouses between all of the teams because the specialties that exist to help deliver this. Everything from very expertise, vision of vulnerable road users, lots of experience in this category, lots of understanding of how behavioral health and public health factors into this, and then a strong team with Northern Arizona University with familiarity with doing a lot of traffic safety analysis for the city of Scottsdale, joining our team, and then even locally Blue Zones providing that public health and traffic safety backing. On that Blue Zones team is a gentleman who will be leading some walk audits, who was actually the inventor of the walk audit and has been doing so for many decades. So just quickly back to the regional context. Scottsdale's had a lot of success. It gets kind of lumped in this US DOT story map in terms of the regional context. And I think that's just interesting to think about and reflect on, that Scottsdale residents travel in and out of Scottsdale. Other people travel in and out of Scottsdale. So the roads and the public resources of a transportation system are something that's shared regionally. And it's important to think about how the culture, the safety culture of Scottsdale reflects on the broader region. So a lot to check in on in terms of the purpose statements of tonight. The why is always an important thing to really dig on early on in the planning process so that we don't have to shuffle back and reflect on purposes that we missed out on. So being very clear and open-eyed and verified going in is important for tonight. A note about language, we'll get into that. There's a lot that are in the world right now in terms of distrust or trust of government, and I want to just go ahead and speak to that head on in terms of what we plan. We definitely plan to pay full deference to the people of Scottsdale, to the advisors of Scottsdale, and to the elected officials of Scottsdale. And there's no questions that we have any hidden agendas. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear. Then there's the common practice assessment, that some of that questionable language or language that may be seen as bias will be found throughout other communities. That does not mean that it has to be applied to Scottsdale, and we will take a very Scottsdale-specific look, Scottsdale-tailored look at the plan that's most appropriate for Scottsdale. So, with that said, let's dive in. So you saw the success that Scottsdale's had over many decades, and that is in contrast to the national story, though. The national story is that fatalities are on the rise, that it is of a national crisis, that it is noted that these vulnerable road users are paying a heavier burden of using the transportation system than the motoring public. So what do we do when we consider the fact that this comes out to an economic impact to the country of $340 billion in 2022, and that this overall harm to the economy is over $1 trillion US. So given that, everybody is kind of called to evaluate what are you doing with your traffic safety programs? What can you do, and think of it more holistically using the best up-to-date best practices that are at your disposal. So with that, part of the reason why Scottsdale's had success is that you've invested in maintaining a high competency in your transportation practice, your department, your practices. So this is just more of that tradition. And then if we can do anything to help join that team and evaluate from a third-party perspective to evaluate that and help make an impact of anything that can be improved through the process, through collaboration, that's what we are tasked with. So the next slides will continue to list more of these rationales for the Strategic Transportation Safety Plan. But on this list, I just want to check in, and maybe this can be a little bit more collaborative as we make our way through this. Is there anything on this that you want to bunk? Is there anything that seems out of place on this list? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. But this is part of the validation process. All right, back to that note about language. So, for the record, personal biases will not be distorting this process, the craft of making public policy. So, leaders are responsible for determining what is the appropriate language, right? We will strike any word that seems to have any bias, that raises hairs on people's necks, that doesn't seem to be evidence-based, unmerited, skews the conversation. We want to dive into the real matter of the issues. We want to put into practice things that people understand. We want to use language that's understood. And for example, what you might see in other communities is the word Vision Zero. What you might see in decades of transportation planning is the word equity. But for example, we can replace these words not out of any need to hide our intentions, but just simply to clarify our intentions. For example, the practice of a school zone speed limit could be perceived as an equitable approach. You are not equally applying speed limits to all collectors. You're taking a specific approach, one that's tailored to a certain subset of the population, being school-aged children who have different perceptions of traffic safety, who have different needs of traffic safety. And that difference is what makes it not equal but equitable, but we don't need to use the equity word if that's going to cause conflict. What we want to do is we want to be clear about our intentions. So, are there any concerns that this board or this body has with regards to words that you want to voice now or concerns you want to voice now as to language that we should use going forward?
Okay. Would you repeat that discussion about school-age children again? I wasn't following that.
Okay. So school-age children have a different perception of safety. They do not have the same life experiences as adults, so they do not judge how to keep themselves safe next to fast-moving traffic the same way that an adult would. So school zones, by practice, will reduce speed limits adjacent to the schools to make the route to school safer for walking and biking populations of school-aged children. And so that's what we mean or have traditionally meant in transportation safety as an equitable approach, because it takes a special look at a subset of the population and says, is equal treatment appropriate here? And that's really the basis of that consideration.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I followed any of that.
Okay. So
School zone's a school zone. I mean, how is equity working in there?
it only works because the school zone was never always a school zone. When the program of a school zone was originally established, somebody had to raise a question about if equal treatments of all collectors are appropriate. If equal treatment to all collectors were appropriate, then that collector street along the edge of the school would have just been given an equal speed limit. Because somebody rose the question and thought about the subset of the population's unique needs for safety, it was adjusted.
I hear what you're saying. I got to digest that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Miller, and thank you for the presentation. And also, thank you for the sensitivity to this issue. I am in safety myself in the ADOT in my day job. I'm a big fan of Vision Zero, and I'm a big fan of equity in transportation, but I also know the realities. And I do know that it is very easy to, that branding does work, or does send a message both ways. And while I encourage you to be aware of that, I also recognize that it's important that the city does have a vision of where it wants to go with safety. And in an effort to avoid being swept up in any drama of the word Vision Zero or the word equity, it's important to recognize that we do still need to make sure the plan is doing its job and that it communicates that we're trying to do the job. So thank you for being sensitive to it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kafto.
Just to follow up on that point and really make it clear, I guess, the city recently passed an ordinance saying that the city will not fund anything having to do with diversity, equity, or inclusion. So I appreciate you being sensitive to those goals, and I would think that the city's current concerns are around financial concerns. And so I would say definitely, as you had earlier, you mentioned how much crashes cost the economy, and so I would like to continue to make that a point to continue to keep the costs of not only inaction, but not only what it would cost to do something, but what would be the cost of continuing or not doing something like that. I think that would be something that would be important for the messaging to keep that in mind also. So.
Any other comments? Commissioner Penquitz?
So I understand that, as my peers have mentioned, there is a lot of triggers about certain words. However, we know, at least from the national data, and I'll be honest, I don't know what the Scottsdale data looks like, that people of color and people of a lower socioeconomic status are more likely to be killed in crashes and most likely to be pedestrians. And we even know that we all have to sacrifice several $1,000s a year just to maintain a vehicle, to have reliable transportation. And even on a one-car household, that is a low-income household, whenever bills come due and you cannot maintain a car, pay for gas, or heck, pay for registration, you will see around Scottsdale a lot of expired license plate vehicles of people that still need to get to work on time. And I will challenge you all to think about your daily commutes and how comfortable they are in a vehicle versus how they would be if you were in a wheelchair or if you had to walk or bike to where you're going. So I want to just ensure that the socioeconomic aspects of Scottsdale are taken into consideration so that we know if there are areas of the city that are more at risk or people that are more at risk. And a lot of people in Scottsdale, I doubt that they would want to walk just for sport, but a lot of people are required to get to what they want to do because they cannot maintain a vehicle or maybe they're not physically able to drive a vehicle. And it would be a shame to exclude that just on the basis of one word that's triggering people.
Chair Miller and Commissioner Pankowitz, I think we'd look to address risk through the network by looking at the aging infrastructure, looking at the conditions along the network. So if we had some of the streets or roadways that were older with less of the safety amenities that we've seen in some of the newer projects, we would like to retrofit those as part of our original plan. So we could look at the risk of, let's say, along the transit lines or along our ADA compliance along those corridors and look to address and highlight where we see those kind of amenities for, say, if you are a carless household and you're relying on the transit system, to highlight that connectivity to the transit system or connectivity through one of the older communities of the older infrastructure in the communities. How can we retrofit and upgrade it to our current safety standards and our current proven safety measures that weren't necessarily around back in the 60s when one of those roadways were done. So we want to look at our high injury network that our consultant is creating for us, and looking at how we can prevent those kind of safety issues along that network when they look at the risk and assess the risk on those stuff. So hopefully we can address all the concerns through looking at the infrastructure and seeing with a particular emphasis towards sidewalk gaps, transit network, and how we can connect to the transit network, as well as all of our ADA compliance that we need to adhere to every single time that we go out and do a roadway. So if I've missed anything in that covers of thing, ways that we can still address the needs of communities that aren't necessarily as affluent to have the cars that certain parts of our community have. I would love to hear it, and we can address it and how we can make sure that we're adding safety components to all parts of our community.
Sorry, thank you, Chair Miller. I did have another comment, and I don't want to lose sight of this in the discussion of this slide, but I did want to congratulate city staff on the pretty phenomenal drop in serious injury crashes, and I don't want to forget that. That's a huge accomplishment, and I think that falls on, to some extent, the people using the roads, but to a very real extent, the city staff who are making sure that the roads are managed and operated in a safe manner. So I just wanted to make sure that that didn't get buried in the discussion of this. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's good to go. Proceed.
All right. Thank you. So our starting point, really to help us be on the same page and become a full team member of this effort, was to highlight some common practice assessments for our team here at the staff level, so that we can be on the same page, so that they can review a lot of these municipal planning documents with a focus on transportation safety. They jot down their ideas, their impressions, and then we gain insights as to their preferences of local implementation, local presentation of what these plans stand for and how they can be effective. So really that's what the purpose of the Common Practice Assessment was for us, and helps us be on the same page moving forward. The practice of producing safety-specific plans for local municipalities has taken up an uptick in lots of new practices, applying modern-day or best practices. But this is really standing on the shoulders of a long-term tradition, and we have lots of statistics and evidence to stand on. So that's how we plan to move forward and what will inform the following meetings and drafts and ultimately what's proposed. One of those practices that's seen an uptick in recent years is the safe system approach. This is taking a more comprehensive look at various elements and then being aware of the sub-elements within a system. And so that means people move differently. There's a variety of vehicles that are on the road. There's a variety of first responders who have to deal with a crash, care at the crash, care after the crash. There's a variety of road conditions. There's a variety of context-sensitive speeds that all fall under influence of contemporary technologies, contemporary understandings of our shared culture, our safety culture, and also a more improved understanding of what it means that humans are vulnerable and make mistakes. So there's lots to sort of pour over when it comes to existing practices and applying this sort of framework of best practices as we move forward. As technical advisory working groups come together to help make this plan possible, we are making sure that all of these elements are really reflected in our working group. As we move forward, we'll probably create a bit of a SWOT analysis along the lines of the safe system approach to understand strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for improvement going forward. And I can pause here if you have any thoughts as to what elements of the safe system approach means to you now, if you have any questions about it going forward.
Commissioner Kafta.
I just wanted to, on the safer speeds part of Nathan's presentation, talking about safer speeds, and then since you have it here, I was struck about, because I believe we used, or best practice is the 85 percentile is how we set speeds. Is that correct? Do you know?
Thank you, Chair Miller and Commissioner Kaftal. That is part of how we set speeds, but we also look at the context of the road, and so that plays a big part as well. So we do have some streets in the city that have a posted speed limit much lower, well, probably more than 10 miles per hour below the 85th percentile speed. But we also try to not get too far away from that. You know, in that presentation about speed determination, I kind of mentioned it's a tricky balance. If the further away from the 85th percentile speed that you post a speed limit, the less compliance and the bigger variation you have in the different amounts of speed that people are driving, and that can lead to unsafe conditions. It makes it harder for people to judge gaps in traffic, because one person might be going 65 and another person's going 50, and they might expect, you know, it makes it harder to know what people are going to be, how people are going to be driving on those streets. So, yeah, it's a kind of a long answer, but we try to look at all the factors when we're setting speeds.
To add to what Sam just stated, I think we've all been on a road, certainly not in Scottsdale, but that was designed for a speed significantly higher than what it's posted, right? You know, a road that's 4 lanes that is posted at 30 miles an hour, and you're just struggling to keep at that speed limit. So I think we, like you said, we try to design our speeds to be related to how the roadway is designed and built. That is, and if that speed is too fast, then we would try and redesign that roadway so it would be better reflected and help with people's behavior on that roadway to stay at the appropriate speed. But if you build a road that's built for 60 miles an hour and then post a speed for 30 miles an hour, it's going to be hard for people to comply with that.
Thank you. That's pretty much what I was thinking about for our last item. You know, I was looking at the data that was collected, and so the 85 percentile for that previous street was, if I'm reading this right, 37 miles an hour. And so the city's taking proactive steps to, rather than adjust the speed limit to that 85 percentile, instead, hopefully the city will design a safer road. And so I guess the main comment I wanted to make on that is safer speeds is I'd like to see the city take into context what is intended on there and then work to make the road safer rather than trying to alter driver behavior on that street, because as just said, if it's too far away from what it feels like, people are going to do whatever they feel like, and humans, as you have on there, people make mistakes, people are going to drive what it feels like. So I just wanted, the 85 percentile never made a lot of sense to me, and so I just want to keep that as the focus for this plan, is to focus on safer streets, and when it comes to safe speeds, think about the context more than what the average speed of the person is, the average driver. Thank you.
We'll move on. Okay, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but part of behavior is building a culture of safety in your city. And so to a lot of people, how do you measure a culture seems like a big task. But there are social sciences and ways that lend us some idea as to how to effectuate culture, how to measure culture, how to even understand whether or not a place is ready to take on, an aggressive or, make a change. Sometimes change is so overdue, and sometimes change is so overwhelming. And so sometimes the culture of a place will tell you where you're at. And so by filling out questionnaires and finding common values is a really great place to kind of start to understand where a culture is, because from common values, you can then understand where there's shared beliefs, and where there's shared beliefs versus where there's existing observations, where those things are different, you can measure that there is a desire for change. And where there is the desire for change comes the willingness to change, and change is then possible. So there's a way to format messaging, format education, and format your design practices to meet your culture. And so Montana State University has a great center of health and safety culture, providing guidance along these types of things, and this is something that we can reference as a segment of the plan, as an element of the plan.
I actually have a question or a comment on that, because Scottsdale residents certainly have a culture, but because we are such a large tourism destination, is there some sort of standard culture that visitors have for places that they don't live? I guess that's something that I would consider as you're doing it. I don't live here, I don't care, or I don't live here, I'm vacationing, I do care. There must be some sort of research about that.
Yeah, how can the culture of a place be imparted on the tourists, on the visitors of a place? And I think that's a fair question. It's not one that I'm prepared to answer tonight, but I appreciate the question.
I didn't think you had that off the top of your head. Commissioner Peng.
But to follow up on that, I visited New Zealand, and when you rent a car there, the steering wheel has a notice that tells you that 80% of traffic accidents are caused by tourists because you're driving on the left side of the road. So, and I must have it somewhere in my house. I will look for it, but it gives several tips to keep people aware when they're driving a vehicle.
Interesting, thank you.
That's certainly unique approach to educating drivers, not just the everyday drivers, but people that are new to the area. So I appreciate that comment. So vulnerable road users is a common term that you'll find in safety practices. Safety plans often have to take a look at this because of the simple fact that kinetic energy on our roadways has only grown, because physics observes that half the mass times velocity squared equals deadly impact for people who do not have protection. We just have vulnerable bodies with vulnerable organs. So everything from hood heights changing on vehicles over the years to the size of vehicles over the years, the weight of vehicles over the years, all play into the amount of kinetic energy upon impact. So what we intend to do is take a really critical look at that, as speed is one of those critical factors. Again, going back to that equation of half mass velocity squared. Velocity squared is the exponential factor in kinetic energy. So understanding speeds and managing speeds is very important for vulnerable human bodies. So with that acknowledgement, we do intend to be very cognizant of vulnerable road users in our analysis, in our high injury network, and we want to raise those concerns. Now, when it comes to vulnerable road users, there's a lot of different ideas out there. It's probably one of the most varied of practices, varied of opinions that you'll find in commentary about safety practices. For some, separating vulnerable road users under or over the street seems unacceptable. Why does the pedestrian have to get out of the way of traffic? Well, we're just trying to separate their exposure, right? We're trying to limit exposure. So maybe that isn't a valuable trade-off. And it has proven success here in Scottsdale. It has been the standard method of approach. Some see it's the driver's responsibility to be accountable to vulnerable road users, that it's really behavioral. It's the more responsibility needs to be put on the driver. More needs to be put on how the road is marked, and lighting, and flashing lights, and you name it. It's all sorts of ideas. But all of this, you should know, has been very well studied in terms of what's effective in crash factors, crash countermeasures. And so as we really peel back the data, as we understand the types of crashes, the people that are involved in the crash, then we're going to be very concerned about applying the proper countermeasures to the types of crashes that we find. So I guess with regards to vulnerable road users, do you have any questions, concerns, or guidance on this matter that you would like to suggest going forward?
I mean, I just had one question, which was related to, so we in Scottsdale, our crashes have been going down, and but on the previous slide, on the earlier slide, it was just one number, and it didn't really break out between vehicles, crashes, and injuries versus pedestrians versus cyclists, and so I would just look from, I'd like to know more information about how that breaks out, and I hope the pedestrian information, the vulnerable road user matches the driver or exceeds it, but yeah, I'd like to see more of that breakout there.
Understood.
I just also, a discussion that we've had many times are things like electric bikes, electric scooters. Just today, I saw someone on a motorized wheel driving down the street, splitting the lane. So how does that impact? Because they're fairly new. There's not a lot of history to look at. Commissioner Pankowitz?
I think it's important to note the role of heat in in the city, when you're walking at 105 degrees and you see shade across the street and you feel like you're going to pass out, you're more likely to take risks. If you're waiting for a very long time to cross the street, you're more likely to take risks. I've unfortunately reviewed crashes where people are running after a bus because they don't want to wait another 15 minutes in the heat. And likewise, just the role of, or the interplay between transportation and pedestrians. Just now I saw someone coming over here to this meeting that was missing their bus, and he was sitting in the middle of Scottsdale Road kind of signaling to the bus to please stop. And I mean, the bus driver is not going to stop and incentivize this person to cross the street at 5 p.m. with like a high volume of traffic. But we tend to see a higher volume of pedestrians commuting when, people in vehicles are commuting, and it has a big impact if you ride a bus and you miss it, whether you're getting back home or, going to work. So.
Thank you for that. I can at least assure you that we have collected, as part of our data sets, transit ridership, and we are going to be evaluating the correlation between crashes and that ridership, because we do factor in the fact that, yes, not only the heat factor, but time is a precious commodity for transit users, and when faced with a longer wait for their bus transfer versus sometimes having riskier crossing behavior, they'll choose the riskier behavior. So we'll take a look at that and we'll see what sort of messaging we can do, what sort of additional comforts we might be able to recommend to help with people who would otherwise maybe make a smarter choice, a safer choice. So thank you for that.
Go ahead.
Okay. So as I alluded to, we'll be extensively looking at collision factors extensively to help make sense of the proper approaches to mitigating those factors or mitigating the risks that come along with those factors. There's I think a really good example, especially with regards to the speed of turning movements, your left in, left out policies that have been doing you well. Wherever that capacity or being more stingy with the maneuvering space of vehicles means that there's less space for misbehavior, right? So it can definitely yield some good benefits. So factoring in all those elements and making a very clear case for tallying all the factors gives us direction that for appropriate countermeasures, for appropriate educational content, and for appropriate enforcement strategies will all come into play once we have this analysis complete. And then just the history suggests that, going back for the 20 years that Scottsdale's been at this, balancing safety and capacity seems to be a point of pride, a point of something to hang your hat on, a point to keep trying to perfect. And so I'll just kind of pause there to, again, see if there's any validation or questions with regards to this approach.
Looks good.
Seeing none. Okay, this sort of is a bit of a teaser slide. This is not our data night at all, but this is just some initial shown mapping of how we come to data-driven outcomes, how we make sure that everything that we do is based on data. And the quality of the crash data will always be something that we wish were better, right? But we'll do what we can with the crash data that's collected. There's no doubt that the minimum standards of data collection are being met. Scottsdale even does a great job at retaining a lot of records for bike and ped crashes that would otherwise get deleted out of the database. So we recognize that already as a strength. If there's any other sort of recommendations that we can make along those lines to improve data collection, to improve these mapping exercises, we can do that. I will note that this slide shows the crash concentrations not only in the southern Scottsdale region, but also along the 101. And we will be sensitive to pulling out the crashes that are on ADOT facilities versus city jurisdiction facilities so that there's an understanding of responsibilities and kind of keeping Scottsdale's priorities purely within Scottsdale's jurisdiction. I guess with that, I can also take a quick pause here and see if there's any observations that kind of jump out to you as to the content that's on the
Commissioner
slide.
Marmon?
Yes, thank you. Is insurance collision data available for use?
I am not aware of insurance collision data. Looking at my colleagues, not familiar with that as well.
Well, you don't want to have an accident and you report it. It may not be a police report, but it's an accident.
It is common practice to start off with crash data that's collected at the police records. That can be supplemented but not geolocated in the same way by looking at hospitalization records and health records of that nature. So it's not exactly a perfect science of like this crash that happened at this intersection that had an injury was this record at the hospital, right? So there's imperfections in how this data is collected, and we can only do what we can. But to the point that was made earlier, disaggregating by different vulnerabilities is our intention so that we understand vehicle-to-vehicle crashes, vehicle-to-ped, vehicle-to-bike. All that will be pulled apart. Also can be looking at the segment type. Is it an arterial? Is it an arterial with very, numerous lanes? Is it more of a minor arterial? Is it a collector? So we'll be looking at all the factors and all the crashes per intersection, crashes per segment, and understanding all the contexts, and so that we provide a really in-depth look at all this as best we can with the data that we have.
Thank you.
Commissioner Penkwitz?
But just to clarify, your high injury network will only have serious and fatal crashes, and this map just shows all crashes and then fatal crashes.
Yeah, so the high injury network is typically fatal and serious injuries. There are some communities that have been open-minded in saying that that data set is so insufficient that we'd also look at minor crashes that have similar factors involved as the serious crashes. We're not here to make any recommendation as to the specifics of the inputs of the high injury network tonight, but that will certainly be a discussion going forward. If you have any recommendations, I'm all ears.
Well, yes, because looking at our item number 3 today, it is very unusual to get like a 5-year crash data of such a small segment of a residential road with 2 crashes, and that both seem caused by speed. And there are some features of that roadway that were mentioned where even like some simple striping may help. Obviously, cushions may help, but all of those like halfway points between arterial streets, if they are being used as cutway points and we have an accumulation of crashes, particularly 5-year data, it might be worth looking at because perhaps people are not getting as injured, but then people on those roads are not even walking on them, so they're not getting the health benefit that they could because of the behaviors that occur on those streets.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to try to make that implicit more explicit a little bit and see what you think in terms of how I'm interpreting your comments. These smaller segments with higher crash rates that are definitely won't necessarily show up as strong as maybe an intersection in a simple heat map. What we would want to do is then come up with a multiplier that makes sense for these types of segments, especially given the fact that there's a extra sensitivity to this condition because of the 100% residential frontage, or because of a school zone frontage, or things of that nature, to be a little bit more sensitive to the context of the land use, the development type, and just sort of being more aware of that this context is meant to be a safe residential space, and we would want to then factor in those crashes with a little bit more sensitivity.
Yes, I mean, if I have a choice between walking on Indian School versus walking on Clarendon, my mind would tell me I want to walk on Clarendon. But if cars are going at, speeds way above of that, then it feels like I'm an Indian School. It kind of takes away the benefit of that residential street for people that want to bike or walk.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Safety countermeasures. There's giant databases of these that exist. Thousands of countermeasures have been studied statistically, proving their efficacy. There's standards for both how effective they are and how sure people are of the research. So there's like a qualitative measure and a quantitative measure, fully creating in-depth toolboxes that already are existing at the city, being developed. We can go through that and see if this is an appropriate list for all of the crash types and crash factors that we monitor given our data-driven approach. So this is just a quick taste of that. Again, we'll get more into that and into more of our data-specific or countermeasure-specific nights. So this is to contrast the state's strategic highway safety plan versus the more local strategic transportation safety plan, and understanding that what you see here in terms of strategies may look different than what you will see in local strategies, specifically because there's more neighborhoods, there's more schools, there's more that factor that different contexts of Scottsdale versus a very highway-centric plan. But nonetheless, this is applicable for facilities within Scottsdale, and that we'd play a complementary role with such a plan. A quick review of the timeline shows you that we're here tonight in February. We're reviewing that similar communities, still taking input, making sure that we understand what similar communities have done. The stakeholder input and engagement phase, we've had a quick test night at Canal Convergence. We're pretty excited about what we see as an innovative approach to help people understand what it feels like to bike within Scottsdale. We understand that the biking population of Scottsdale is only a certain percentage, but we can reach the broader audience, the broader stakeholders of Scottsdale by giving specific experience using virtual reality technology, capturing 360-degree video so that no matter where you look, you get the sense that you're in the bike lane or a bike trail or a buffered bike lane or protected bike lane or a more collector street experience. So we have all of that recorded and tested, and we're pretty happy that we can get before and after experience reflections through questionnaires that will help inform, again, that vulnerable road user, and contributing hopefully to a more informed questionnaire filled out, a more empathetic questionnaire filled out, and yeah, just contributing to something positive within the safety culture of Scottsdale while we're in the engagement phase. Beyond the VR biking engagement, there's going to be general engagement, a general website with a broad questionnaire for all residents and stakeholders. We're going to have hands-on walk audits, thanks to Dan Burden from Blue Zones helping lead the charge. We will be looking at those physical conditions, the feeling, the stresses, the hands-on experience of what different contexts, whether we're at a busy intersection or a modified intersection or a transit hub. We'll be taking different looks through South Scottsdale, Central Scottsdale, and North Scottsdale to sort of get a good feel for different walking experiences and giving people a chance to reflect on what they see in terms of the built environment conditions. We'll get to City Council and have a meaningful dialogue there, like we have had tonight, checking in, validating a lot of these assumptions as we move forward. And we'll have open house with the broader public involved, making sure that we're reaching the broad public. Then when it comes to the development of the plan,
Sir,
there's...
can I just ask
Yeah,
a quick question? How are you involving young drivers and school children?
Young drivers and school children. So the specifics of our engagement plan are still being created. So if you have suggestions of that, those are important populations that we must reach, not just have good intentions of reaching, but must reach. Could certainly make note of that.
But I would just, encourage you to reach out to the school districts and, new drivers tend to be more vulnerable. And certainly as we talk about pedestrians and bicyclists, finding out how we can make sure that places are safe for our youth would be important.
Understood. Yes, I understand those concerns. When it comes to development of our plan, beyond the engagement, we will be making sure that all of the data fits within our geospatial high-risk mapping or high-injury mapping. There's the policy assessment that will be guided by a lot of what that data shows for us, concentrating our focus on policies that we think make the most sense to evaluate based on the crash data that is presented, or how the data presents itself to us. We'll be back making more presentations to this body. Staff will be making presentations to this body as this work continues carrying out forward. Ultimately, we want to make this plan very implementable, very straightforward, that gets out of its own way, doesn't become a burden to try to figure out what it is, what it's trying to say, how it necessarily effectuates change. So implementation is very important, and thus prioritization of projects, of programs that ultimately will come out of this planning effort. And then finally, we want to make sure that the draft is in your hands, that you have a good chance to review it, and that we can address anything before reaching a final, or a pre-final and then final plan. All of that will be summarized and hopefully easily digestible using plain language, language that makes sense to Scottsdale, has full deference to the leadership of Scottsdale. After going through our first draft, there's going to be more stakeholder engagements before we even reach the final draft, so lots to say there in terms of how we pull out that VR experience too. Is going to be a lot of pop-up engagements, finding people where they're at, and neighborhood HOAs being reached out to, more meetings with this body before we reach final draft, and then ultimately council's authority to adopt and ensure that we publicate. Out of that plan, there's going to be lots of communication that comes about. There's going to be lots of public input that help promote a successful plan. And essentially, words matter. On the screen here, we have person hit and killed by a car. The car probably was not responsible. It's the driver. So these are the types of language that we can take into account when having communication that really affects behavioral change, right? I don't think the car's behavior is going to change. It's ultimately people. And finally, we'll get to recommendations and an action plan that makes sense for everybody involved. If there are examples from other places, you can do your own common practice assessments, take a look at the memos that's been provided to you by staff and see what you think makes a lot of sense. Before we give you a ton of content to review, go ahead and fill within your authority to start familiarizing yourself with other community safety action plans, because ultimately we want to reach a well-informed, ready to go, positive safety culture, and you're certainly part of that. With that, that concludes tonight's presentation. Ready for questions and any further discussion that you might want to have at this time.
Commissioner Marmon?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Right before you started your presentation, which I thought was very good, there was a slide that outlined the current safety measures that the city's doing. And once again, I'll make full disclosure that I was sideswiped by a car coming out of the Lilo lanes because I wasn't seen at night. The NAU studies, which you provided us, were really good, thorough mathematical analysis, but they were based on very, very little data. And they only addressed 2/3 of the operation, meaning the left in and left out. And even with their little data, they had a lot of conflicts. So I think the third part of the Lilo movement, the right-hand slip turn into traffic, hasn't been addressed, and it's been ignored in the studies. So I think the design, I looked at the design manual, and there's very little guidance on how to design these things, and there's very little signage associated with them. So I think we need to do a more thorough analysis of the Lilo lanes, even though there are like 60 of them now, to make sure they're safe. I think I found that very few other jurisdictions are using this movement, and I think it's dangerous. The other thing I want to just say is that on my way down here, there was another really bad accident at an intersection with fire engines and everything, and it just underscored the way we're going with the roundabouts. I think that approach is really, really good. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kafta?
Again, just to echo Commissioner Marmon's this fantastic presentation. The one thing I had questions about, which was again on what Scottsdale's currently doing, is I just didn't know if we have any raised sidewalks and if that would be something we could look at as part of road design to help the vulnerable road users, so that, as you mentioned, separating people or adding or designing the streets to be safer. So where there are those crossings, maybe force the drivers to go up and over rather than pedestrians to go down and then up as they cross. So that was the only real comment, because I don't think we have any raised sidewalks in the city.
Chair Miller and Commissioner Kafta, we actually have a couple. We have one on Camelback east of Hayden, and then we have one off of Trailside east of Pima. They look more like speed tables, but you know we are limited on where we can put those just based upon speed, because they are considered a pseudo traffic calming. We can't put them on a 30 or 35 mile per hour, anything really higher than that, because it could damage vehicles and that sort of thing. So we are a little bit limited, and then we would only put them probably at like a multi-use path crossing on a lower speed street. So it kind of limits where we can use them, but we have used them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is those kind of lower speeds. The multi-use path, especially for me as a user of the path a lot, when you come out, it's at just north of Chaparral and Hayden. When they're coming out of the shopping center there, the drivers always pull and just completely block the path there. And I understand, because they can't see, they need to pull forward to see the cars move, the other drivers, the other cars moving. But that seems, that little section there seems to be where it could use some help.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Thank you. I wanted to get clarity on the data that's being used. I'm not sure if I'm understanding that all of the collision data is only related to injury accidents. So if the collision did not involve injury, then that is not being considered?
Thank you for the question. A point of clarification, all crash data is collected regardless of injury, but they are coded unsuspected injury, or minor injury suspected, serious injury suspected, fatality, everything to not an injury. So all of that can be factored into understanding the geographic spread and concentrations of crashes. It's just that in order to get the best priority of our time and efforts to address crashes, we're trying to save as many lives and improve as many lives as possible. So that hinging on the severity of the crash is really our primary focus at this time.
Okay, so that's the standard, that it focuses on injury. I suppose I do think even if there's not an injury, there's clearly a emotional aspect, as Commissioner Marmon talking about his accident that he's had, and it feels like you would have more buy-in from people, and the safety aspect of just even avoiding an accident, regardless of injury, is still a motivation to want to have a plan for the city.
We can certainly address crashes holistically. Yes.
Commissioner Cardella, Chair Miller, I think we can definitely add a component of looking at all crashes. What the high injury network would help us with is focusing priority of projects when we look at safety. Where's our investments going in? How can we improve the overall network? So the high injury network is important for us looking at when we're going to do a retrofit of a roadway or changing that roadway. I understand that we look at all crashes and we can make some small modifications, but that high injury network would get prioritization of where we're spending the most funding to really reduce those crashes that are repeatedly giving us serious injuries and fatalities. We know several intersections that have repeated serious injuries and multiple fatalities. Those would be the ones that we'd really want to hone in on and make sure that we're tackling those as fast as possible. So we can definitely add all crashes to an analysis, but we want to really highlight those high injury networks because we need to stop those crashes right away. Thank you.
If I could expand on that a little bit too, the high injury crashes will also have certain environmental factors and certain design factors, certain traffic counts and pedestrian counts and things of that nature. And where we see that there's trends or crash types that are of most concern, we can look for where maybe some intersections are performing better than the worst. And we can also be thinking about predictive crashes as well, so that we can take a proactive approach to how standards and improvements are made throughout the system. Again, addressing that probably lots of near misses, probably lots of high stress conditions that would improve people's experience, even if their life isn't, any lives haven't been lost.
Chair Miller, sorry, I just want to add one other thing to that. We do look at all crashes every 2 years, as you know, and as part of the traffic volume and collision report. We've been doing that over 20 years, so, and we will continue to do that. But one of the things that, it's been brought up before, and it's kind of missing in that report, is a deeper look into injury severity of those crashes, and that's not included in the traffic volume and collision report. So I think this plan, focusing on that, will be a good thing to do for us, and it might be something also we add into the traffic volume and collision report in the future.
Thank you. Commissioner Penkovich?
I'm assuming you're also looking at time of day, right? Yeah. And then I haven't really seen this in road safety plans, but we are seeing an increase of like attacks, people on vehicles going into crowded spaces, markets, and things like that. And I know that we obviously want to focus first where people have died or have gotten serious injuries, but there are several streets throughout Scottsdale that during like the festival season get closed, and perhaps planning for bollards for those locations that are removable or as a precaution. I don't know if that's worthwhile, but I know that we are seeing an increase in those incidents.
Chair Miller and Commissioner Pinkowitz, Director Malenjako has definitely directed us to highlight that when we come back for our enforcement component of this chapter. We definitely want to talk to PD as well as talk to several other departments about ways that we can highlight that in this plan and introduce ways to prevent those kind of events from happening. We do have several events. We just closed down Greenway and Hayden for the Waste Management Open. We have the Prado del Sol, so we do have several of those events that are street-related closures. So yes, we want to put that in the plan. We want to highlight that and really hone in on how we can address that from our perspective and make that safer and better. So yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Commissioner Davis.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm excited to see this plan move forward. I think the timeline you've laid out is very good. I like the fact that there is lots of iterations and loops that we can get better feedback from the community, as well as City Council. I'm especially interested in seeing some of the insights that you find with Chandler and Gilbert, with similar population sizes, but I think your map showed a lower incidence of fatalities. Perhaps that's because they're newer transportation networks that have some design features. I'm very interested to see what we can, leverage from their experience to help improve our safety culture. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Again, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. Thank you for taking questions along the way as they occurred to us. And I want to thank the commissioners for their involvement in this as well. It will be an interesting and enriching journey we will be taking over the next few months. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, and thank you for all the questions, especially the ones that forced me to clarify. Those are the most important. I want to make sure that we're communicating as clearly as possible, so thank you very much.
And I guess we have one more slide just to give a teaser or a notification to attend the next Transportation Commission meeting that we will be discussing the initial goals and policy discussion. So adding on to this discussion and highlighting our different sections of the plan and the goals and policies that would be, at least in draft form, for you guys to take a look at, give us your feedback on, and any other additional ones that we'd want to put in. So coming March 20th, we'll come back and have another discussion about this.
Thank you. And now you're going to tell us all about LAPES.
Yes. We've been here for a while, so I'll try and keep it brief. This is just a introduction into the LAPES and a possible action for us, recommending us to update the LAPES. All right. So the local area infrastructure plans. So we're going to talk about the local area infrastructure plans, where they're located, how we use them, and then the recommendation. So the local area infrastructure plans they help guide us on neighborhood-specific infrastructure. So we're talking mostly up north, mostly dirt roads with mostly dirt trails. So very rural, very low-density environments. The plans serve to help guide city staff, mostly transportation staff, on when we get development proposals, land divisions, or single-family reconstructions, right-of-way abandonments, these kind of individual requests from individual property owners in relation to in their neighborhood. how have we planned out the connectivity of that neighborhood, and how can we keep everybody having access to the roadway network. So when these development proposals and requests come in, the LAPES are one of the most key assets we have to evaluate what they're requesting and what the city has planned for that environment. As you can see on the screen, these are the local area infrastructure plans, with the areas that they have their own dedicated infrastructure plans. They are neighborhoods, mostly in the northern region, including East Shea, that do not have HOAs or not planned developments. So some of our older communities that we inherited when we acquired this land from the county. And so how can we keep that rural and equestrian character in these northern neighborhoods that when they were county land, now city land, while also providing that connectivity to those single-family lots that need to happen. So we have Desert Foothills, Desert Highlands, Dynamite Foothills, East Shea, Horseman Park, and Whisper Rock, all very distinct and unique situations when each one of these individual parcel requests come in. Transportation's use of the LAPES is a key tool for us determining the right-of-way dedications in the neighborhood. So most of these areas still have their GLO easements, those easements given back over 100 years ago to make sure that we had land set out for right-of-way and connection for these parcels. So we use the GLOs if they haven't been requested to be abandoned yet as right-of-way, but when they get requested to be abandoned, we look to see how much right-of-way we need from that parcel in order to accomplish the mission of keeping the roads going and the connectivity throughout this neighborhood. Designing what streets are going through versus which ones are cul-de-sacs. So the plans show which ones are designated to be streets, which ones are cul-de-sacs, and there's lots of negotiations, interpretations, and conversations with neighborhoods up there about how they feel and what they think should be and should not be. Clarifying what the areas should have unpaved trails. So alongside with the dirt roads, we have the plans and the laid out network for the unpaved trails on the side of the roads. So as we talked in the fall about the unpaved trail connections going through some of the neighborhoods, the LAPES show key routes and locations for where those trails should be going. It adheres to the goals and values of the 2022 Transportation Action Plan, so it takes its guidance from our already adopted and accepted general plan and action plans. So that's where it gets its kind of authority. This is an example of what one of the LAPES maps look like. We have about 50 or 60 showing each one of the individual neighborhoods. You can see the parcels. You can see the city boundary, sometimes if it's in there. The preserve. Most of these neighborhoods are surrounding the preserve, so a key feature to highlight that the preserve is there. Then we have existing trails, planned trails, proposed roads, and then proposed street alternatives. So whenever one of these parcels will come in, they're looking to subdivide, they're looking to abandon some of their right-of-way, they're looking to abandon the GLO. We get out these plans and take a look at what's been planned out and what how the connections are looking and should look, so that we make sure that every parcel has access to right-of-way. That is the key feature of this, as well as if we have a planned trail there, we're certainly going to take that into account when they're asking for an abandonment of that easement or that right-of-way, so that we make sure we have access for both the trail, future and proposed trails, as well as the roadway. So issues with the LAPES currently, it's not council or commission adopted, so we're going to look to, as we move forward, meet with the residents on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. We want to kind of finalize and formalize the LAPES. We want to move through this commission and possibly council, depending on the need of that, to kind of formalize it. And then most importantly, we have no formal or established process existing for updates or changes to the LAPES. So the LAPES have been around for us for about 15 years. Some of these changes have been introduced into the network, some have not yet. So how can we formally update those when those changes get made, as well as if there's a request for a change to the LAPE, what kind of process could we have, similar to the neighborhood traffic management process? How can we formalize that process so if somebody wants to make an official request to change the LAPs, we can go through an official process and make sure that we give them their time to present that in front of a body like the Transportation Commission, as well as maybe Paths and Trails Commission, to have their concerns or their voices heard. The picture right there is one of the situations of the LAPs, and the LAPs have, most of the roads up there are connecting 5 or 6 homes, so we get very intimate situations happening where somebody will dig out a wash on the road to make it impassable, and then we'll be called out to assess, is it part of the LAPs? Should it be a roadway going through? Some things look like roads that should be going through, they're really driveways. Some look like roads that shouldn't be part of the LAPs, and some are supposed to be roads that have now been dug out or moved around so that they can't be passed anymore. So this happens quite a lot where we get called up to take a look and assess this. Just down that way, somebody put a fence in the GLO in order to kind of, since it's a dirt road, it's kind of a little more fluid than your pavement road, so they can stop people from driving on one side of the tree than the other. And the road's supposed to go on the one side of the tree, so then it forced the traffic to go around the tree the other way, which took it onto private property, and then we get called out. So it's just several of the features that happen when there's no established way of making a change to the LAPs. They kind of just take it upon themselves to barricade the LAPs, the roads, and it causes certainly problems with that. So we want to kind of establish a formal process, a way that we can handle those kind of situations in more of a formal way. It's outdated in many cases, like I said. We've made changes, and we need to just update it and get it to current standards. It's been a great process, a great tool for us. It's made changes. Now we just need to reflect those changes in the current plans and the current maps and let it exist and last for another 15 years. And then needs to be reviewed by the public in the area. We've had landowner changes. We've had development happen up there. We want to go out to the public and review the map and the plan of how to connect to every network with the neighbors themselves. Steps moving forward, we want to undergo a public outreach effort for the communities, coordinate closely with the impacted departments, so including water and stormwater. Those are also departments that are definitely impacted when we do these single-family development reviews. Establish a formal process, like I said, for requesting an update to the LAPs or a change to the LAPs, and then present to Transportation Commission the process results and the updated maps at a future time when we talk. It's gonna be quite a while for us to do this. It's a lot of communities we have to go talk to a lot of times, and there's gonna be definitely a lot of strong emotions about how these networks should go. So we want to hear them out. We want to give them the time to make sure we get it right, and then we'll come in and present that back to you guys. So with that, questions, discussion, and then possible action moving forward to recommend that we move forward with updating the LAPs.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions, comments? Commissioner Davis.
For areas of the city that don't fall under a LAP, how would we manage infrastructure plans? Is it through the GIS system? Is that? There's a tool, right, that we use where we note what the planned infrastructure is for other areas.
Yeah, so most of the other areas in the city have paved roads or established curb gutter, so it's got definitely a much more formal layout of the network, and maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
No, that was, I just didn't know if I didn't know if there was a better tool than a LAP, if there was a way in which we were managing infrastructure plans elsewhere that we should be applying to these areas, or if this is.
Oh, okay, I got you,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yep.
So it's Commissioner Davis. The LAPs are in the GIS. We make the changes through the GIS system. These are just the PDFs that are presented and put onto the website. So we definitely already have them into a GIS system that we make the changes into, and we'd continue doing that process. We could put on the website very easily an interactive map so people could see it better, but we just have it in PDF form here. We definitely have that data in GIS.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Kafta.
I've been wondering about this for a while. Almost every single city council meeting I go to, on the consent agenda, there's always some abandonment, and it always kind of bothered me that we just keep every couple of weeks we give away more of our right-of-way. So I'm really glad to hear that there is a review process, and we are making sure that the trails and the connectivity and all the things that make Scottsdale great is kept in mind when those abandonments come up. So thank you very much for this presentation.
Certainly, Commissioner Coffell, and we definitely meet. We just met today. We meet weekly to review all the cases that are coming in, and definitely go around the table making sure if there's a right-of-way abandonment request, making sure that we look at every possible thing that could be impacted if we gave up that right-of-way, and we don't take that lightly to give up right-of-way unless there is no real need for the city currently or in the future. So certainly the future takes a big impact on whether we would abandon a right-of-way. That is there a possible need for that for the public to use that? So certainly we take that very seriously if we're going to abandon any right-of-way.
And if I understand, what you are looking for is a motion from this commission to proceed with?
Just to recommend to staff to update the local area plans and create a formal process for requesting changes.
Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. I move that we adopt staff's recommendation to update the local area infrastructure plans and create a formal process to request changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Kyle, will you take the vote?
Yeah, we'll do a roll call here. Chair Miller?
Approved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon?
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Marmon?
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Crofttile?
Enthusiastically approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella?
Yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Thank you. Approved.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. And with that, I see nothing else on the agenda, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you so much. Thank you, staff. Really appreciate all the presentations. Thank you, folks from TY Lin. We'll see you next month.